English Pen campaigns for freedom of expression, for the protection of freedom of expression, for the freedom to read and the freedom to write. And our work ranges across supporting translation, going to work in disadvantaged communities, and campaigning using advocacy for the protection of freedom of speech. And it's one of the oldest human rights organisations in the world. It was founded in 1921, and obviously things have changed in that time, and things have changed very, very fast in the last 20 years or so, so that more and more of our cases are about freedom online and the freedom to express yourself online. And as we all know, to the extent that our own lives have been changed, we're enjoying an extraordinary amount of freedom, extraordinary amount of different ways of communicating that's changed all of our lives for the good. And obviously in countries that are not democracies, that means that there is a whole new plethora of ways of communicating dissents and expressing views that governments may not want to have expressed. But obviously the other side of that coin is with that comes new means of repression, new means of surveillance, new means of censorship. I'm delighted to welcome a really expert panel who can cover that very broad range of topics that we're going to talk about. Sitting right next to me is Gigi Alford, who's a Senior Programme Officer for Internet Freedom at Freedom House, based in Washington, DC. And Gigi manages global projects to promote and protect human rights and democracy online. Her work focuses on challenging restrictions to freedom of expression for internet users in repressive countries, and particular targeted activists, bloggers, independent media outlets. Sitting next to Gigi is Giles J. Ungpakorn, who's a Thai academic with the wonderful title, as Gus was saying earlier, A Horrible Situation, but an impressive title as an academic in exile in the United Kingdom. He's former Associate Professor of Politics at university in Thailand, where he was very notoriously charged with lèse-majesté in late 2008, after writing a book criticising the military coup in 2006. Since he arrived in Britain, Giles has been an active commentator on Thai politics, using blogs, websites, internet radio, social media, and he's done a number of speaking tours at universities throughout Europe. Next to Giles is Gus Hosein, who's Executive Director of Privacy International. Gus has worked at the intersection of technology and human rights for over 15 years, and he's acted as an external evaluator at the UNHCR, advising the UN Special Rapporteur on Terrorism and Human Rights, and he's also advised a number of other international organisations. His organisation is a member of a new civil liberties coalition, of which English Pen is also proud to be part, that's seeking reform of the law and judicial oversight around the activities of the intelligence services in the wake of Edward Snowden's revelations.
Wael Ghonim, who is an Egyptian Arab Spring activist, said that if you want to liberate a society, just give them the internet. But I think we're going to modify that and saying it needs to be qualified by saying a free and unfettered internet, rather than a tightly controlled and abused internet. China is the perfect case study for this, so I prepared some remarks to discuss China in the context of our Freedom on the Net report. Freedom House puts out an annual survey of 60 countries that are representative of the global movement for net freedom and also this backlash as well. In doing that report last year, Freedom House found 10 of the most common methods of control. So first is blocking and filtering, and this one actually is an example from China, and this is the Great Firewall, also known as the Golden Shield Project. And this is something we'll get into later, but it's everything from IP blocking, DNS filtering, URL filtering, deep packet inspection, VPN blocking, and also specific encrypted methods of protocols. Those are also now targeted and blocked by this Great Wall, this Great Firewall. Then you have attacks against regime critics or anyone perceived as regime critics. These are cyber attacks that are backed by the Chinese government. This is especially true of ethnic minorities, including Tibetans and the Uyghur population, other religious minorities, democracy advocates, anyone who's complaining about corruption specifically targeted at top party officials and their families. Paid pro-government commentators is something that's particularly egregious in China because there are estimates of numbers anywhere from tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of what they call the 50-cent party. And they earn this name because the rumor is they're paid about 50 cents per post, per comment that they put. And it's a phenomenon known as astroturfing, and it's made to look as if these are citizen voices who support the party and attack critics of the party, and but really you can trace back that they're being paid and trained to do this. There are also physical attacks and murders. Reporters Without Borders called China the largest prison for journalists, and this is true of writers who may not practice journalism, but they're just trying to get their literary pieces out. Surveillance is pervasive, layered, algorithmic, and human-driven. There's no limit for this, and we'll get down into the intermediary liability implications. Takedown requests and forced deletions of content is particularly interesting because, again, this has been outsourced to large corporations, both domestic and foreign companies, that to operate inside the country actually sign a pledge that they will abide by guidelines that the CPC puts out. There's also blanket blocking of social media and other ICT platforms. More than 3,000 domains are blocked in China. And so I'm coming to our last point, our last internet control method, throttling and shutting down internet and mobile services. This happened in 2009 on a wide-scale basis in Xinjiang during the revolts that were happening with the Uyghur population against some of the practices and especially the economic suppression that was happening there.
The deep political crisis in Thailand was precipitated by the 1996 economic crisis and the way that different political groups responded to that. And the political party headed by Thaksin Shinawatra, the brother of the newly deposed Prime Minister Yingluck, was a party that proposed modernisation and inclusion and stakeholdership for the poor, and this was eventually opposed by all sectors of the elites, and the elites include the military, the courts, the so-called independent bodies, the middle-class academics, and even, unfortunately, the NGOs. In Thailand, the greatest threat to freedom of speech is the lèse-majesté law. And this isn't really just about people who insult the monarchy, because the elites use the monarchy to justify what they're doing. So anything like a coup d'etat, if you criticize that, then you can be deemed to be criticizing the monarchy. Lèse-majesté prisoners are tried in secret courts. You can still be found guilty if what you said was true, and they're completely denied bail. Another law in Thailand which is against freedom of expression is the computer crimes law, and added to that is the contempt of court law, which prevents people from criticizing decisions made by the judiciary. The problem with Thailand isn't just a question of censorship of books and the internet, which does go on. A number of sites, hundreds of sites in fact, are blocked by the Thai government, including my website, Red Thai Socialist. But the government allows people to make comments, for example, on Facebook and other things, but then there's a huge government department which spies on people and then gets them reported to the police. So you've got this state spying going on. In addition to this, you've got the action of non-state groups who are against the democratic process, and they are creating a sort of witch hunt. There's an army, there's a police general, I believe, or army general, who has set up the rubbish disposal unit. In other words, everyone who is against the status quo is rubbish. And this actually, these non-state actors lead to violence against people who are dissidents.
Up until a few years ago, it was the internet was becoming a challenge to governments, particularly in Asia, in that it was enabling speech, it was enabling people to organize. And every time they tried to introduce a new policy to monitor the internet, these policies got quite severely criticized and pushed back. And so governments got more clever, as they tend to do. They said, why bother speaking publicly about the surveillance powers that we want when we can deploy them secretly? Why bother having people monitor people when we can use technology to monitor people? And what we've been finding across the world, but particularly in Asia, is the deployment of secret surveillance through advanced technology. And so when we think about surveillance, we tend to imagine a police officer on the street just looking, or a camera monitoring, or being stopped at a protest and having your photograph taken or your ID checked. Those are remarkably quaint and ancient techniques for monitoring people. The way they do it now is, it's actually staggering. When I discovered these techniques about 3 or 4 years ago, even I, with my background in computer science, even I was surprised. And I'll describe 3 of the techniques that are now being developed, sold, and marketed by Western companies, many of them based in the United Kingdom, and sold to governments around the world, particularly across Asia. The first is the ever-growing, infamous national monitoring centers. That is the ability to conduct mass surveillance of all communications flowing in and out of the country. This was previously thought to be science fiction, and until we actually found the marketing materials of the companies who are selling these techniques, it can be done. They can intercept and monitor hundreds of thousands of communications at any moment in time, and they can retain an entire nation's communications for up to a year. Imagine you have a protest just down the street. Can you imagine how many police it would take to identify every single person at that protest? You'd have to take photographs, you'd have to get good quality photographs, and run, say, facial recognition programs against those photographs to try to identify people. You don't need to do that. All you need is a device called an IMSI catcher, and it's no larger than, say, this bottle of water. It comes in wearable forms now. You can actually wear a vest where it's just a little box in your vest. And the moment the police officer turns on the device, it pretends it's a mobile phone base station. And so every mobile phone in the area will connect to that device. And it will identify itself to that device. And it will even take your phone call. So if your phone rings and you're talking to somebody, it will transmit itself through that device. And so that device has been able to identify everybody in a geographic area. And depending on how powerful it is, you can identify a larger geographic area. We found a company, there's actually a few of them now, but there's one British company called Gamma that sells a product called FinFisher. And what it does is that it turns on the microphone on your phone, it turns on the camera on your phone, and you have no idea. It's not when you are talking, it could be on right now. It does the same thing with your computer. At any moment in time, you could just turn on the camera and you wouldn't know. Governments don't announce the fact that this technology has been purchased. They don't announce the fact that it's been deployed at a wide scale, millions of deployments of these types of what we call Trojan horse technologies on people's devices. This is how government monitors you now. This is how they chill speech. Except they're not chilling speech because you don't know that you're under surveillance. You don't know that they had access to all your SMSs until, as we found in cases, somebody's being tortured and beaten during an interrogation, and their entire transcript of entire conversations are presented to them. It's only at that point you know that they've compromised your devices or they've compromised your entire communications infrastructure to start identifying people and holding them to account in the way that only repressive regimes can.